The pounding started at 6 in the morning, a hollow rhythm that dragged me from sleep into panic. I opened the door to find Deputy Harlan standing there, face impassive, handing me a stack of stapled paperwork. It was an eviction notice, but when my eyes scrambled to the bottom line to find the landlord who wanted me gone, I did not see a bank or a stranger. I saw my parents' names. The pounding started at 6 in the morning, a hollow rhythm that dragged me from sleep into panic. It was not the polite rap of a neighbor returning a package or the tentative knock of a solicitor. It was the heavy, authoritative thud of a fist that knew it had the law on its side. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The room was cold. The gray light of early dawn filtering through the curtains I had sewn myself 2 years ago. I grabbed my robe from the foot of the bed, wrapping it tight around my chest as if the terry cloth could serve as armor. When I opened the front door, the air was damp and smelled of wet pavement. Standing on my porch was a man in a beige uniform, his face set in a practiced mask of indifference. I recognized him instantly. Deputy Miles Harlan. We had gone to high school together, though we had traveled in different orbits back then. He was a quiet linebacker who sat in the back of algebra. Now, he was the man holding a clipboard that would dismantle my life. "Caroline Rogers," he asked. His voice was flat, devoid of the familiarity that usually comes with living in a small town. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded thin, brittle. "Is something wrong?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he extended a hand holding a stack of papers folded lengthwise. "I am serving you with an order of eviction," he said. "You have 72 hours to vacate the premises." I stared at his hand. I did not take the papers. The words refused to process. Eviction, I owned this house. Or, at least, I was paying for it. I paid the property taxes. I paid for the new water heater when the old one burst last winter. I paid for the paint on the walls and the sod in the yard. "There must be a mistake," I said, finally taking the documents because his arm remained extended, unwavering. "I am not a tenant. I have lived here for 5 years. I pay the mortgage directly. It is a court order." "Caroline," he said. He shifted his weight, his leather belt creaking. "I am just serving it." I looked down at the paperwork. The top page was a standard form, dense with legal jargon and case numbers. My eyes scrambled over the lines, looking for the name of the bank, thinking perhaps there had been a clerical error with the autopay, or maybe a scam. But under the line labeled plaintiff/petitioner, I did not see a bank. I did not see a lending institution. I saw 2 names typed in stark black ink, Gwen Rogers and Thomas Rogers. The world tilted on its axis. My stomach dropped, a physical sensation of falling that made my knees buckle. I had to grab the doorframe to keep from sliding to the porch floor. My parents. I looked up at Miles, searching for some sign of a joke, some indication that this was a cruel prank. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes shifted away from mine, looking over my shoulder into the living room, as if checking for threats. "You have 3 days," he said. "If you are not out by then, the sheriff comes back with a locksmith." I stood there, freezing in my thin robe, clutching the betrayal in my hands. As Miles turned to walk back to his cruiser, a movement across the street caught my eye. Mrs. Gable, the neighborhood gossip who spent her days peering through her blinds, was standing openly on her front lawn. She was holding her phone up, the lens pointed directly at me. She was recording. The humiliation hit me hot and fast, flushing up my neck and into my cheeks. I wanted to scream at her, to demand she stop, but I knew that would only make the footage more valuable to the local rumor mill. I was 33 years old, a woman who had rebuilt her life after a messy divorce, a woman who ran her own small graphic design business, a woman who prided herself on independence, and here I was, being filmed like a criminal in my pajamas while a deputy sheriff walked away from my door. I stepped back inside and slammed the door, locking it with trembling fingers. The silence of the house, usually my sanctuary, suddenly felt oppressive. It felt like the silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. I looked at the papers again. forcing myself to read past the names. Unauthorized occupant. Failure to vacate. I ran to the kitchen, my bare feet slapping against the hardwood floors I had refinished with my father just 3 years ago. I remembered him on his hands and knees, wiping stain, telling me how proud he was that I was making this place my own. I grabbed my phone from the counter. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my mother's number twice. Finally, it rang. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. It went to voicemail. "Hey, this is Gwen. Leave a message." Her recorded voice was bright, cheerful, the voice of the woman who baked cookies for the church bake sale and sent handwritten thank you cards. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking. "Miles Harlan just showed up at my door. He gave me an eviction notice. It says you and Dad filed it. Please call me back. This has to be a mistake. Please." I hung up and dialed my father. It went straight to voicemail. I called the house line. No answer. Panic began to curdle into nausea. I sat on one of the bar stools, the paper spread out on the granite island. I read the affidavit attached to the order. It claimed I had been served with a notice to quit 30 days ago. It claimed I had refused to communicate. It claimed I was squatting. I checked my email, searching for anything from my parents. Anything with the word house or legal or notice. Nothing, just newsletters, client invoices, and a recipe my mother had forwarded me 2 days ago for lemon chicken. 2 days ago. She had sent me a recipe 2 days ago, acting as if everything was normal. While she had an active lawsuit filed against me, I went to the pile of mail on the side table. I was meticulous about my mail. I sorted it every day. I tore through the stack bills, flyers, coupons. There was no notice. There was no certified letter. I was not crazy. I knew I was not crazy. But the paper in front of me said I was a liar. I needed to see the proof. I showered in 3 minutes, threw on a pair of jeans and a sweater, and drove to the county courthouse. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The drive was a blur of gray highway and strip malls. Every time I passed a car, I felt like they knew. I felt like the words "evicted by parents" were stamped across my windshield. The county clerk's office smelled of stale coffee and toner. The fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I stood in line behind a man paying a traffic ticket, my foot tapping a nervous rhythm against the linoleum. When it was finally my turn, I slid the case number across the counter to the clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read, "Brenda. I need to see the file for this." I said, "I am the respondent." Brenda typed the number into her computer, her long acrylic nails clicking against the keys. She squinted at the screen, then stood up and walked to a row of filing cabinets behind her. She returned with a thin manila folder. She opened it and turned it toward me. "Here is the affidavit of service," she said. "Says you signed for the certified letter on the 12th of last month." I looked at the green return receipt card stapled to the document. In the signature box, there was a scrawl of blue ink. It read, "Caroline Rogers." I stared at it. It had the loops of my C. It had the sharp downward strike of my R. It looked like my signature. It looked exactly like my signature. But on the 12th of last month, I had been in Chicago for a design conference. I had the plane tickets. I had the hotel receipt. I could not have signed for this letter. That is not my signature, I whispered. Brenda shrugged. Not unkindly, but with the weariness of someone who heard excuses all day long. "It is a certified mail receipt, ma'am. It is hard to argue with." I flipped through the rest of the file. My eyes caught a phrase in the petition description regarding property held by the Briar Hollow Family Trust. I looked up. "What is the Briar Hollow Family Trust?" Brenda glanced at the screen again. "Looks like the entity that holds the title. Your parents are listed as the trustees. It is a standard trust-related property dispute. Happens all the time when families start fighting over assets." I walked out of the courthouse feeling like the ground was dissolving beneath my feet. I did not know about a trust. I thought the house was in my name, with my parents as co-signers on the mortgage because my credit had been wrecked after the divorce. That was the arrangement. They helped me get the loan. I paid every cent, and eventually, we would refinance solely into my name. They had told me it was done. They had told me the paperwork I signed 3 years ago was to finalize the deed transfer. I needed help. I could not afford a high-powered real estate attorney. My savings were meager, poured mostly into the house, so I drove to the legal aid center downtown. It was a small brick building squeezed between a pawn shop and a laundromat. The waiting room was full of people looking as desperate as I felt. I waited for 2 hours, watching the clock on the wall tick away the minutes of my 72-hour window. Finally, a young woman called my name. Nina Calder looked overworked. Her desk was a mountain of files, and she had a coffee stain on her blouse. But when I sat down and explained the situation, her eyes sharpened. She listened intently, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. "So, you are saying you never received notice," Nina said, "and you were out of town on the date of the alleged service?" I nodded. "I can prove it. I have my flight records." Nina tapped her pen against the pad. "That is good. We can use that to file an emergency motion to stay the eviction. But Caroline, I need you to understand something." She leaned forward, her voice dropping an octave. "Evictions between family members are rarely just about the house. If they went to the trouble of forging a signature, and if it looks as much like yours as you say it does, it was likely practice, then this is not an impulsive decision. This is strategic." "What do you mean?" I asked. "I mean, people do not evict their children unless there is a financial imperative," she said. "Usually, it is debt. Sometimes it is a hidden asset sale. But they need you out for a reason, and they need it to happen fast. That is why they claimed you were an unauthorized occupant. It bypasses the longer protections given to legitimate tenants." She tore a sheet off the pad and handed it to me. It was a list of instructions. "Document everything." She said, "Do not speak to them on the phone. If they call, let it go to voicemail. If you speak to them in person, record it if the law allows, or have a witness. Do not agree to leave. Do not hand over keys. And for the love of God, check your credit report." I walked out of her office with a plan. But the pit in my stomach had only grown deeper. Financial imperative. Hidden asset sale. I drove home, the afternoon sun casting long, distorted shadows across the road. When I pulled into my driveway, I automatically looked up at the motion-activated camera I had installed above the porch light. It was a small comfort, a way to check who was at the door when I was working late. The status light on the camera was off. I frowned. It was hardwired. It shouldn't be off unless the power was out. But the lights in the living room were on. I unlocked the door and went straight to the router in the hallway closet. I logged into the admin panel on my phone, a habit from my days setting up networks for small businesses. I checked the access logs. Someone had logged into the router's admin interface at 4 a.m. 2 hours before the deputy arrived, they had disabled the external ports. They had turned the camera off digitally. My skin went cold. The password to the router was not the default. It was complex. I had written it down in only one place, a small notebook I kept in the junk drawer in the kitchen. My parents had keys to the house. They had a key for emergencies. They knew where the junk drawer was. Someone had been inside my house while I slept. Someone had turned off the camera so there would be no record of the deputy arriving. Or perhaps no record of them leaving. I grabbed my keys and ran back to the car. I needed to see them. I needed to look my father in the eye and ask him if he had crept into my house like a thief. My parents lived 20 minutes away in a sprawling ranch house that they had always claimed was too big for them, yet they refused to downsize. As I turned onto their street, I expected to see their cars in the driveway. I expected to see the warm glow of the lamps in the living room. The house was dark. The driveway was empty. My father's truck was gone. My mother's sedan was gone. I parked on the street and walked up the driveway. The silence here was different than at my house. It was the silence of abandonment. I rang the doorbell. Nothing. I pounded on the door. "Mom, Dad." "Open the door." I went around to the side of the house, peering through the dining room window. It was slightly ajar, a habit of my mother's to let out the smell of cooking. I pushed it open further and leaned in. The moonlight cut across the room. The china cabinet was empty. The doors were open, and the shelves were bare. I moved to the living room window. The furniture was there, but it looked disturbed. The drawers of the sideboard were pulled out and left hanging. There were rectangular clean spots on the dusty shelves where picture frames used to be. They had not just gone out to dinner, they were packing. My phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out. It was a text from Marin, my brother's wife. My brother, David, was the golden child. The one who lived in Seattle and only came home for Christmas. Marin and I had always been friendly, united by our shared exhaustion with the Rogers family dynamic. Don't go to them alone, the text read. They've been planning this. I stared at the screen. I typed back furiously. Planning what, Marin? Where are they? They evicted me. 3 dots appeared. Then they disappeared. Then a single message, I can't say more. David would kill me. Just protect yourself. They are desperate. I stood in my parents' flower bed. The smell of mulch and fear thick in the air. Desperate. That was the word Nina had used. Financial imperative. I drove home in a daze. When I walked into my bedroom, I felt violated. The sanctity of my space had been shattered twice today, once by the law, and once by the knowledge that my parents had been here, plotting against me. I went to my closet to change out of my clothes. I reached for a hanger, and my hand brushed against something on the top shelf. Tucked behind a stack of winter blankets, it was a blue plastic folder. I did not own a blue plastic folder. I was obsessive about organization. All my files were color-coded, and blue was for client contracts. This was a cheap drugstore folder. I pulled it down. It was heavy. I sat on the bed and opened it. Inside was a chaotic mess of papers. Old property tax statements for my house statements. I thought I had lost a photocopy of my birth certificate and a blurry printout of an email. I squinted at the email. It was dated 6 months ago. The subject line was Briar Hollow Structure. It was from a lawyer I did not know to my father. Thomas. Regarding the Briar Hollow Family Trust. Once the occupant is removed, we can proceed with the leveraging of the asset. The lenders are anxious. We need clear title by the end of the quarter. Once the occupant is removed, I was the occupant. I was the obstacle. There was another document beneath the email. It was a ledger, handwritten in my father's blocky script. It listed dates and amounts. January, 1,200. February, 1,200. March, 1,200. These were my mortgage payments. But next to them, he hadn't written mortgage. He had written rent. He had been documenting my payments as rent for years. He had been building a paper trail to prove I was a tenant, not an owner, long before today. I closed the folder. I felt sick. A deep, twisting nausea that had nothing to do with food. I turned off the light, but I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to the house settle. I replayed every interaction of the last few years. The way my mother would change the subject when I asked about transferring the deed. The way my father would pat my shoulder and say, "Don't worry about the paperwork. Carrie, we are taking care of it. We are helping you." Helping. Their help had always been a currency. They helped me with college, so I had to major in what they wanted. They helped me with my wedding, so they controlled the guest list. They helped me with the house, so they owned the roof over my head. I had thought this was just how families were. I thought it was love, messy and controlling, but love nonetheless. I realize now, lying in the dark with the eviction notice on my nightstand and the evidence of their betrayal in my closet, that it wasn't love, it was leverage, and they had finally decided to cash me in. The fluorescent lights in Nina Calder's office hummed with a low, insectile buzz that seemed to vibrate directly against my temples. I sat across from her, watching her highlighter slash through the dense text of the eviction petition. She was moving with a frantic, focused energy. Her brow furrowed in a way that made me want to bolt for the door. "We are filing an emergency motion to stay the execution," Nina said, not looking up. "We are arguing improper service and lack of due process. But Caroline, you need to see this." She spun the document around on the desk. She had highlighted a paragraph in neon yellow. The petitioners assert that the occupant poses a significant risk to the physical integrity of the property. Furthermore, The occupant has engaged in a pattern of non-payment and refusal to vacate upon request. My stomach turned over. Risk to the property I had spent my weekends that entire summer sanding the deck. I had planted hydrangeas along the walkway because my mother said they were her favorite. They are lying, I said, my voice thick, in eviction court. Truth is often secondary to speed, Nina said, finally looking at me. Her eyes were dark and serious. If they can convince a judge that you are damaging the asset, or that you are a squatter who has never paid a dime, the judge might bypass the usual timeline. They might grant a lockout in as little as 24 hours after the hearing. I felt a wave of nausea. 24 hours. My parents are saying I am dangerous. I said, the words tasting like ash, to a house I love. They are saying whatever their lawyer told them to say to get the fastest result. Nina replied. She tapped the paper. This language. This is boilerplate for, get them out now so we can sell. It is aggressive. It is not something you do to a daughter you plan to reconcile with. I walked out of the legal aid center into the blinding brightness of the mid-morning sun. The world looked exactly the same as it had yesterday, cars moving, pedestrians glancing at their phones, but I felt like I was walking through a simulation. The people around me did not know that the ground could open up and swallow them whole just because two people signed a piece of paper. I got into my car and sat there, the heat building up inside the cabin. I stared at my phone. I had called my mother 12 times since the deputy left. I had sent texts ranging from pleading to furious. I dialed again. This time, the ringing stopped after the second trill. Caroline. Her voice was soft. It was the voice she used when I had the flu as a child, or when I called her crying after my husband left. It was a voice designed to soothe, and hearing it now, in this context, made my skin crawl. Mom, I said. I gripped the steering wheel. Mom, Deputy Harlan was here. He served me an eviction. Why are you doing this? There was a pause, filled with the faint static of a poor connection. Oh, honey, Gwen said. Her tone was terrifyingly casual, as if we were discussing a schedule change for Sunday dinner. You are overreacting. It is just paperwork. Paperwork. I nearly screamed. It says you are kicking me out in 3 days. It says I'm destroying the house. It is just a formality. Caroline, she said, and I could hear the rustle of movement on her end. Thomas and I are handling some estate planning. The lawyer said we needed to clear up the title issues. It is for everyone's protection. Protection, I asked. Who are you protecting? You are making me homeless. You won't be homeless, she said, a hint of impatience creeping into her soothing tone. You can come stay in the guest room for a few weeks while we sort this out. We just need the property vacant to satisfy the trust requirements. You are making this so dramatic. I felt like I was losing my mind. She was evicting me, suing me, and lying about me in court records. Yet she was inviting me to stay in her guest room, Mom, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I went to the courthouse. I saw the signature on the certified mail receipt. It wasn't mine. Did you sign my name? Silence. Long, heavy silence. We did what we had to do to keep things moving, she said finally. Her voice had lost its warmth. It was brittle now. You were away. We didn't want to bother you. You forged my signature, I whispered. Caroline, stop it, she snapped. We are your parents. We are trying to save the family's assets. You have no idea the pressure your father is under. Just pack a bag and come home. We can talk about it then. She hung up. I stared at the phone, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Save the family's assets. Pressure. I needed answers that Gwen was never going to give me. I drove to the coffee mill on 4th Street. It was a chaotic, noisy place, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and burnt milk. I chose a table in the back corner, facing the door. 10 minutes later, Marin walked in. My sister-in-law looked tired. She was a nurse, and she usually wore her exhaustion like a badge of honor. But this was different. She looked frightened. She scanned the room twice before she saw me, and when she sat down, she didn't take off her coat. I can't stay long, she said. David thinks I'm at the grocery store. Marin, what is going on? I asked. I kept my hands on the table to stop them from shaking. Mom just told me this is about estate planning. Marin let out a sharp, bitter laugh. Estate planning. Is that what they are calling it? She leaned in close, lowering her voice. Thomas is in deep. Caroline, deeper than just credit cards. He has been borrowing from private lenders. Hard money, guys. The kind who don't report to credit bureaus, but do show up at your house if you miss a payment. I stared at her. My father was a retired insurance adjuster. He wore cardigans. He mowed his lawn on Saturdays. The idea of him involved with loan sharks was absurd. Why, I asked. Bad investments, Marin said. He got sucked into some crypto scheme 2 years ago. Tried to recover the losses with high-risk stocks, and lost those too. They are drowning. They have been shuffling money between accounts for months to keep the lights on. She looked around the coffee shop again. Last week, I heard him on the phone. He was talking to a group called Larkridge Renewal Partners. Do you know them? I shook my head. No, they are a development firm, she said. Aggressive. They buy up distressed properties, rezone them, and put up luxury condos. Thomas was trying to leverage his assets to get a bridge loan from them. She paused, her eyes filling with sympathy. I heard him tell them that the Briar Hollow property, your house, was the cleanest asset he had. He said it was unencumbered. He promised them he could deliver it vacant by the 1st of the month. The 1st of the month was 6 days away. He sold me out. I said, he is trying to save himself. Marin said, and Gwen just goes along with it. She is terrified of being poor. She would set the world on fire if it meant she could keep her country club membership. Marin reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Her fingers were cold. Caroline, if they are desperate enough to forge a signature, they are desperate enough to do worse. Larkridge isn't a normal company. I Googled them. They have been sued for tenant harassment in 3 counties. If Thomas is in bed with them, you are not just fighting your parents, you are fighting a machine. She checked her watch and stood up abruptly. I have to go. If David asks, you haven't seen me. He is in denial. He thinks Dad is just cash flow poor. He doesn't want to know the truth. She left me sitting there, the noise of the coffee shop swelling around me. Larkridge Renewal Partners. Cleanest asset. I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't. The house felt like a target now. I sat in my car in the parking lot and pulled up the app for my bank. I needed to see my own finances. I needed to know if the rot had spread. I navigated to the credit monitoring section. I usually ignored the notifications, assuming they were just routine updates. My credit score had dropped 40 points in the last month. I clicked on the Inquiries tab. There was a hard inquiry from LRP Holdings, LLC, dated 3 weeks ago. I clicked on New Accounts. There was a credit card opened 2 months ago with a bank I had never used. The balance was already $8,000. The air left my lungs. My identity. They hadn't just used my house. They had used me. I closed my eyes. A wave of betrayal crashing over me so hard it felt physical. This wasn't just a financial maneuver. This was a violation. My father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle, had stolen my name to cover his debts. He had looked at me, his daughter, and seen a resource to be mined. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat there and felt something inside me harden. It was the soft part of me, the part that wanted to believe in the goodness of family, calcifying into stone. I drove toward the county records office, but on the way, I saw a familiar cruiser parked in the lot of the high school stadium. Deputy Harlan. I pulled in next to him. He was eating a sandwich. The window rolled down. When he saw me, he stopped chewing and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He didn't look surprised. Caroline, he said, I know you can't give me legal advice. Miles, I said. I was leaning out my window, the engine still running. But you served me this morning. You saw my face. He looked at me for a long moment. He looked tired, too. Everyone in this town looked tired today. I can't talk about active cases, he said quietly. I know. I said, just tell me. Is this normal? The speed of it. He looked around the empty parking lot. The attorney listed on that paperwork a guy named Stanwyck. Yes. I said, he has filed 5 evictions in the last 2 weeks. Miles said. All of them rush jobs. All of them for properties that sit on the edge of the new revitalization zone the city council is voting on. And every single one of those properties ends up listed by Larkridge Renewal within a month. He took a bite of his sandwich, staring straight ahead through the windshield. If I were you, Caroline, I would watch my back. These guys don't play nice. And if your folks are mixed up with Stanwyck, well, he is known for cutting corners. Thank you, Miles, I whispered. He nodded once, rolling up his window. I went to the county recorder's office. I needed to see the deed. I needed to see when this had happened. The clerk directed me to a computer terminal. I typed in my address. The history of the property scrolled down the screen. I saw the purchase date 5 years ago, Thomas and Gwen Rogers. Then, a transfer. Quitclaim deed. It was dated 3 years ago. Grantor Thomas and Gwen Rogers. Grantee, the Briar Hollow Family Trust. I stared at the date. November 14th. 3 years ago. The date hit me like a physical blow. 3 years ago, on November 14th, I had been sitting at my parents' kitchen table. I had just finalized my divorce. I was a wreck, crying, barely sleeping, terrified of the future. My ex-husband had left me with nothing but debt and a bruised ego. My father had made me tea. My mother had made soup. They had put a stack of papers in front of me. "We are going to help you, Carrie," my father had said. "We are going to secure the house so no one can take it from you. We just need to move some things around. Sign here." I remembered the pen in my hand. I remembered the blur of tears making the words swim. I remembered trusting them completely. I thought I was signing papers to refinance the mortgage into my name, or to protect the equity from my ex-husband's creditors. I hadn't read it. God help me. I hadn't read it. I had signed my house away into a trust they controlled, believing they were building a fortress for me, when in reality, they were building a piggy bank for themselves. And the signature on the certified mail receipt, the one I saw this morning, it looked like my signature because they had it on file. They had the original from that day in the kitchen. They had likely traced it, or practiced it until the muscle memory was perfect. I printed the deed history. I printed the trust formation documents. I gathered the evidence of my own stupidity and their malice. My phone rang. It was Nina. "Caroline," she said, her voice brisk. "I pulled the service records. We have a problem. Or, actually, they have a problem." "What is it?" I asked. The process server filed an affidavit claiming personal service. She said, "He claims he handed the notice to you on the 12th at your place of employment." I waited. "He lists your employer as Rogers Consulting," Nina said, "and he describes the recipient as a female, approximately 55 years old, blonde hair, glasses." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "I am 33. I said, "I have brown hair, I don't wear glasses, and I work for myself, from home. Rogers Consulting is my father's old LLC." "Exactly," Nina said. "He served your mother, or your mother pretended to be you. Either way, the service is defective. This gives us a strong argument for dismissal. But Caroline," she paused, "if your mother accepted service as you, that is fraud on the court. If we bring this up, we are accusing her of a crime. Are you ready for that?" I looked at the printed deed in my hand. I thought about the credit card opened in my name. I thought about the rent ledger in the blue folder. "They are evicting me. Nina," I said, "they are stealing my life. I am ready." "Good," Nina said. "I will update the motion. But be careful. If they realize we know about the bad service, they might try to fix it. They might try to serve you again, or construct a new narrative." I hung up and drove home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across my lawn. The house looked beautiful in the golden light, a small bungalow with a wide porch and the hydrangeas I had planted. It looked like a home. I walked up the steps, my keys in my hand. There was a piece of paper taped to the front door. It wasn't there when I left. I stepped closer. It was a bright orange sheet. "Notice of abandoned property. To Caroline Rogers, from the Briar Hollow Family Trust. This notice serves to confirm that the property has been inspected and found vacant and abandoned as of date inserted 2 weeks ago. The landlord intends to reclaim possession. The date was handwritten. It was backdated 2 weeks. They were trying to rewrite history. They were trying to say I had already left. If I had abandoned the property, they didn't need a court order to change the locks. They could do it right now. I ripped the paper off the door. My hands were shaking, but not from fear anymore, from rage. They had come to my house while I was out. They were watching me. I unlocked the door and went inside. I locked it behind me. I went to the kitchen and grabbed a chair, wedging it under the doorknob. I took a picture of the orange notice. I took a picture of the date. I took a screenshot of the metadata on the photo to prove when I took it. I sat down at my dining table and opened my laptop. I created a new folder. I named it Eviction_defense. I uploaded the photos. I scanned the documents from the blue folder. I wrote down a timeline, starting from the day in the kitchen 3 years ago to the moment I found the orange note. I wrote down the conversation with Marin. I wrote down the credit inquiry. I felt a tearing sensation in my chest. I was building a case against my parents. I was preparing to go into a courtroom and prove that the people who raised me were liars and thieves. I looked at a framed photo on the mantel. It was taken at my college graduation. My father had his arm around me, beaming. My mother was laughing, holding a bouquet of roses. We looked like the perfect American family. I stood up and turned the photo face down. They had counted on my silence. They had counted on my shame. They thought that because I was their daughter, I would go quietly into the night rather than expose them. They thought I would be the good girl who signed the papers and took the blame. They were wrong. The administrative violence of it, the paperwork, the filings, the quiet clicks of a mouse that destroyed a life was terrifying. It was a cold, bloodless way to kill a relationship. But if they wanted a war of documents, I would give them one. I sat there in the darkening house, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face, and I waited for the next move. I knew it wasn't over. I knew that somewhere, Thomas and Gwen Rogers were sitting with their lawyers, or perhaps with the men from Larkridge, deciding just how far they were willing to go. I was about to find out. I drove to my parents' house with my phone lying face up on the passenger seat. Connected to a call that I had not yet unmuted, Nina Calder was on the line, a silent witness to the confrontation I could no longer avoid. She had advised against this meeting at first, citing the risk of emotional volatility, but I had insisted. I needed to look them in the eye. I needed to see if the people who had raised me were truly gone, replaced by the desperate strangers named in the court filings. The driveway was full this time. My father's truck and my mother's sedan sat side by side, looking deceptively normal. I parked at the curb, taking a deep breath that rattled in my chest. I tapped the unmute button on the phone. "I am walking in now." I said, "Can you hear me?" Loud and clear. Nina's voice came through the speaker. Tinny but steady. "Keep the phone in your pocket or hold it low. Do not let them know I'm listening unless you have to. And Caroline, do not agree to anything." I walked up the path. The same concrete walkway where I had learned to roller skate 3 decades ago. I didn't knock. I used the key I still had on my ring, the brass cold against my thumb. The door swung open. The television was blaring in the living room, a game show, the audience clapping in a manic rhythm. My parents were sitting in their usual spots, my father in his leather recliner, my mother on the floral sofa with a basket of knitting she wasn't touching. They froze when I stepped into the room. The house smelled of lemon polish and stale tension. My father reached for the remote and muted the TV, the silence rushing in to fill the space like water. "Caroline," my mother said, half rising. "We didn't know you were coming." I didn't answer her. I looked at my father. He looked older than he had a week ago. His face was gray, the lines around his mouth etched deep with stress. Why, I asked. It was the only word I could manage. My father sighed, a heavy, irritated sound, as if I were a teenager asking why I couldn't borrow the car. "We told you. Carrie, it is a restructuring. It is financial. You forged my signature." I said. I was standing in the center of the rug, my hands balled into fists to stop them from shaking. "You filed an eviction order against me. You told the court I was destroying the property. I am not discussing this, Thomas said, looking away toward the darkened window. You have lawyers involved now. You made this a federal case. I made it a case I asked, my voice rising. You sent a deputy to my door at 6 in the morning. You are trying to throw me out on the street in 3 days. It is not the street, he snapped, his head whipping around to face me. His eyes were bloodshot. We offered you the guest room. You are the one being difficult. You are the one refusing to help this family when we are up against a wall. Help the family, I repeated. How does evicting me help the family? Because the house is the only thing we have left, he roared. He pushed himself up from the chair, his movements jerky and aggressive. You think that house belongs to you? You think you earned it? We bought it. We put up the down payment. We carried the risk. You just lived there. You played house while we footed the bills. I have paid the mortgage for 5 years. I said, my voice trembling. I have the bank statements. I paid for the roof. I paid for the floors. You paid rent, Thomas shouted. He was red in the face now, stepping closer to me. You paid rent to the trust. That is how it works. You have no equity. You have nothing but what we gave you, and now, when we need to liquidate to save everything else, you are acting like a selfish brat. You owe this family. Caroline, you owe us for the years we supported you when you couldn't support yourself. I took a step back, stunned by the venom in his voice. He wasn't just desperate. He was resentful. He truly believed that my existence was a debt I had yet to repay. Mom, I said, turning to her. She had sat back down, her hands gripping the knitting needle so hard her knuckles were white. Mom, tell him this is insane. There is no trust. I signed papers to transfer the deed to me. That was the agreement. Gwen looked at Thomas, then at the floor. She wouldn't meet my eyes. There is a trust, Caroline, she said softly. The Briar Hollow Family Trust. Since when I asked. Since the divorce, she whispered. I stared at her. But I signed transfer papers. I sat at that kitchen table and signed the deed transfer. You signed a transfer into the trust. She said, why didn't you tell me I asked? Why did you let me believe I owned it? She finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was pitying, which hurt worse than anger, because you were fragile then, she said. The words hung in the air. Fragile. You were a mess, Caroline, she continued, her voice gaining a little strength. Your husband had just left. You were crying every day. You couldn't handle the details. Thomas said it was better to put it in a trust so nobody could take it from you. We were protecting you from yourself. I felt a cold sensation wash over me. It was an insult disguised as maternal care. They had used my grief as a smokescreen to seize control of my financial future. They had looked at my heartbreak and seen an opportunity to secure an asset. And now, I asked, now you are protecting me by kicking me out. The trust has a clause, Thomas interrupted, his voice returning to a gruff, businesslike tone. It allows the trustees to remove any occupant if the property is required for refinancing or liquidity events. We are exercising that clause. We have to. Why, I asked. Why now? Because the market is turning. He lied. I knew he was lying. I could see the tell twitch in his left eyelid. We have a buyer who wants a quick close. An empty house sells for more. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I held it up. Nina, I said. Did you hear that? Yes. Nina's voice cut through the room, sharp and professional. Mr. Rogers, this is Nina Calder, attorney for Caroline Rogers. You just admitted to the existence of a trust and a specific removal clause that was never disclosed to my client during the period she was making mortgage payments. You also admitted the eviction is pretext for a sale, not based on any fault of the occupant. Thomas went pale. He stared at the phone as if it were a weapon. You recorded this, he whispered. I am not recording. I said, I am represented, and we are done here. I turned and walked out. My legs felt like lead. Behind me, I heard Thomas shouting at Gwen, asking why she had let me in. But I didn't stop. I got into my car, locked the doors, and drove until I was 3 streets away before I pulled over and vomited into a fast food bag on the floorboard. The next morning, the reality of what I was up against began to clarify. I sat in Nina's office again, the adrenaline of the confrontation replaced by a dull, aching dread. Nina had been busy. She had a stack of papers on her desk, and for the first time, she looked excited. I looked into the attorney. She said, "Stanwyck, the one who filed the eviction," and I asked, "He is not just a local general practice guy." She said, "He is the go-to hatchet man for Larkridge Renewal Partners." I pulled his filing history. In the last 6 months, he has handled 12 evictions in the Briar Hollow district. Every single one of them was for a property that sits on a specific 3-block radius. She pulled out a map of our town. A red line circled my neighborhood. "This is the proposed revitalization zone." Nina said, "Larkridge is trying to assemble a contiguous parcel of land to build a mixed-use complex. Retail on the bottom, luxury apartments on top. But they need the land. They need your house." It clicked. Marin was right. My father wasn't just selling the house. He was part of a land assembly deal. That explained the speed. Developers like Larkridge had strict timelines. If they didn't secure all the properties by a certain date, their financing would fall through. "Thomas isn't just selling," I said. "He is delivering." "Exactly," Nina said. "And that gives us leverage. If Larkridge finds out there is a messy title dispute and a fraud claim attached to this property, they might back off. They hate bad PR. But Thomas is probably under a contract with them. If he doesn't deliver the house empty, he probably faces massive penalties. That is why he is so angry." I said, "He is trapped. We are going to subpoena the trust documents." Nina said, "And we are going to subpoena his communications with Larkridge. We need to prove that this eviction is an abuse of process." I left her office feeling a strange mix of validation and horror. My parents were not just bad with money. They were cogs in a machine designed to displace people, and they were willing to crush me to keep the gears turning. My phone rang as I was driving home. It was a number I didn't recognize, with a local area code. "Hello," I answered. "Hi, is Thomas Rogers available?" A woman's voice asked. She sounded brisk, professional. "You have the wrong number." I said, "This is his daughter." "Oh, I apologize," the woman said. "The file listed this as the primary contact for the restructuring loan. We are just trying to verify the income documents he sent over this morning." I froze. "What lender are you with?" I asked. "I am calling from Apex Capital." She said, "I don't think he is available." I said, my voice tight, "But I will let him know you called." She hung up. I stared at the dashboard. Apex Capital, another hard money lender, and he had used my phone number. Why? Because he was dodging them. He put my number down so that when they called to nag him, I would answer, and he could claim he missed the call. Or worse, he was setting me up as the contact person for a debt I didn't know existed. My identity was being stitched into his financial ruin. One thread at a time, I needed to clear my head. The court hearing was still 2 days away, but the waiting was unbearable. The Dispute Resolution Center had reached out a mandatory step in our county for family evictions before a judge would hear the full case. I had agreed to go, mostly because Nina said it would look good to the judge if I tried. The mediator was a soft-spoken man named Mr. Henderson. We sat in a small, windowless room with a round table. My parents were not there. Their lawyer, Stanwyck, had sent a junior associate who looked bored. Mr. Henderson looked at me with kind, tired eyes. "Caroline," he said, "these situations are always painful, but in my experience, courtrooms destroy families. Is there no path to reconciliation here? If your parents agreed to a longer move-out timeline, would you consider vacating?" I looked at him. He saw a daughter in a housing dispute. He didn't see the forged signatures. He didn't see the years of manipulation. I cannot reconcile with fraud. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "this isn't about the move-out date. It is about the fact that they are stealing the equity I paid for. They are lying about me in public records. But surely," he said gently, "there is a middle ground, perhaps a payment plan or a settlement. There is no middle ground when one side is holding a knife. I said, I walked out of the session early. I realized then how the system worked. It was designed to smooth things over, to pressure victims to accept compromise, to avoid clogging up the docket. It relied on the assumption that families ultimately wanted to be together. It had no mechanism for handling a family that had become predatory. I drove aimlessly for an hour, avoiding my house. I didn't want to go back there yet. It felt like a prison. I found myself driving toward the industrial park on the edge of town, past the rows of orange storage units. My mother had rented a unit there years ago to store my grandmother's antique furniture. She had given me a key when I moved back to town, asking me to drop off some boxes she didn't have room for. I hadn't been there in 2 years. I pulled up to the gate and punched in the code. It still worked. I drove to Unit 404. The roll-up door was rusted at the bottom. I unlocked the padlock and slid the door up. The air inside was stale and hot, smelling of old paper and dust. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe I just wanted to be somewhere that felt like the past. Before everything went wrong, I started shifting boxes, Christmas decorations, old coats, a box of my father's college textbooks. Then I saw a gray filing cabinet in the corner. I remembered it from their old home office. I opened the top drawer. It was full of tax returns from the 90s. I opened the bottom drawer. There was a black ledger lying on top of the files. It was a standard accounting book, the kind you buy at an office supply store. I opened it. The handwriting was my father's, precise, blocky. It was a log of properties, not just the house I lived in, but 2 others I recognized as rentals he had owned and sold years ago. I flipped to the section marked Briar Hollow. The entry started 5 years ago. June 1st, payment received $1,200. Allocation rent, July 1st, payment received $1,200. Allocation rent. He had listed every single mortgage payment I had ever made, but he hadn't listed them as mortgage contribution or equity buy-in. He had strictly, meticulously labeled them as rent, but it was the notes in the margins that made my blood run cold. Next to a payment from 2 years ago, the month I had asked about transferring the utilities into my name, he had written, "She is asking questions. Divert. Tell her it affects the insurance rates." Next to a payment from 6 months ago, Larkridge meeting went well. Need to prep asset for liquidity. Keep her calm. And the most recent entry, dated 3 weeks ago, delay until closing. Do not engage. I sat on the concrete floor, the ledger heavy in my lap. This wasn't just a ledger, it was a diary of manipulation. He had documented the lies. He had written down his strategy for managing me like a difficult employee. Keep her calm. Divert. This book could destroy me in court. If a judge saw this, they would see a consistent, years-long record of rental payments. It reinforced their narrative that I was just a tenant, but it also proved the fraud. It proved that the help was a lie from day one. I took the ledger. I put it in my bag. I felt like I was carrying a bomb. My phone buzzed. It was Tessa, my best friend since college. "Hey, come over." The text read, "I made lasagna, and I cleaned out the spare room. It is yours if you need it. Seriously, get out of that house." I stared at the message. The temptation was overwhelming. To go to Tessa's warm, safe house, to eat lasagna and drink wine and pretend that my parents weren't trying to destroy me, to sleep in a room where no one was watching the router logs. I started to type, "On my way." Then I stopped. Nina's voice echoed in my head. "If you leave, they can claim abandonment. If they claim abandonment, they change the locks tomorrow." If I went to Tessa's, I was giving them exactly what they wanted. I was making it easy for them. I deleted the text. "I can't," I typed. "If I leave, I lose. But thank you. I love you." I drove back to my house. It was dark now. The porch light was off. I hadn't fixed the bulb yet. I walked up the steps, checking the door frame for new notices. Nothing. I went inside and locked the door. I reset the router password again, though I knew it was likely futile. I checked the windows. I pulled the shades down tight. I sat in the middle of my living room floor, surrounded by the silence of the house I had paid for, the house I had loved, the house that was now a battlefield. I felt a profound, crushing loneliness. The person I was 2 weeks ago, the daughter who trusted her parents, who believed in safety nets, was dead. She had been killed by a stack of paperwork and a handwritten ledger. In her place was someone else, someone colder, someone who was starting to think like them. I realized I was in a psychological trap. If I fought them, I was the cruel daughter dragging her elderly parents through court. I would be the pariah of the extended family. My aunts and uncles would shake their heads and say I was ungrateful, but if I didn't fight, I was complicit in my own erasure. I would lose my home, my credit, and my dignity. I would be the fool who let them use her up and throw her away. I looked at the ledger in my bag. I wasn't going to be the fool. I pulled out my laptop and scanned the pages of the ledger. I highlighted the notes in the margins. Keep her calm. Divert. I sent the files to Nina with a subject line, evidence, premeditation. I was going to fight, but I wasn't going to scream and shout like Thomas. I wasn't going to play the victim like Gwen. I was going to be quiet. I was going to be strategic. I was going to let them think they were winning. Right until the moment I laid the truth on the table. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee. It was going to be a long night. I had 5 years of financial records to organize and a timeline to perfect. The war had started in my parents' kitchen 3 years ago. It would end in a courtroom in 2 days, and for the first time, I allowed myself to feel a flicker of something that wasn't fear. It was anticipation. The county courthouse was a building designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were too high, the floors were too polished, and the air was recycled so many times it tasted like dust and anxiety. I walked down the hallway toward courtroom 4B, the sound of my heels clicking against the marble echoing like a countdown. Nina walked beside me, her briefcase swinging with a heavy, purposeful rhythm. "Remember," she said, keeping her voice low, "we are not trying to win the whole war today. We are just trying to stop the immediate bleeding. We want a continuance. We want the judge to see that the service was defective." I nodded, but my throat was so tight I could not speak. We pushed through the double doors. The courtroom was surprisingly small, smelling of old wood and floor wax, and there they were. Thomas and Gwen Rogers sat at the plaintiff's table. My father was wearing his navy blue Sunday suit, the one he wore to weddings and funerals. His hair was combed back perfectly, and he was reviewing papers with a man I assumed was Stanwyck, the Larkridge attorney. My father looked serious, composed, and undeniably respectable. He looked like a man who was burdened by a difficult child, not a man who had forged documents to steal a home. My mother sat next to him. She was wearing a gray cardigan I had bought her for her birthday 2 years ago. She was staring at her hands, which were clasped tightly in her lap. She was shaking, a fine, continuous tremor that made the fabric of her skirt vibrate. They did not look at me, not once. I took my seat next to Nina. I felt a bizarre urge to wave at them, to scream, to run over and shake them. "I am here." I wanted to yell, "I am the daughter you raised." The bailiff called the case. Rogers versus Rogers. The judge was a woman in her 60s with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked bored. She had probably seen 20 evictions this morning already. "Mr." Stanwyck stood up. He was smooth, his voice projecting confident authority. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of an unauthorized occupant refusing to vacate a property held by the Briar Hollow Family Trust. The petitioners, as trustees, have the absolute right to manage the asset. We are asking for an immediate order of possession." Nina stood up. She was shorter than Stanwyck, but she felt denser, more solid. "Your Honor, this is anything but straightforward. The respondent, Caroline Rogers, is the daughter of the petitioners. She has lived in the home for 5 years and has paid all mortgage costs. Furthermore, the affidavit of service is defective. The process server claims to have served Ms. Rogers personally at a workplace she does not own, on a date she was 300 miles away. We have travel records to prove this." The judge looked over her glasses at Stanwyck. "Defective service?" she asked. Stanwyck didn't flinch. "A clerical error, perhaps, regarding the location, But the respondent clearly has actual notice, as she is standing right here. Nina pressed on. It is not just a clerical error. Your Honor, it is indicative of a pattern of fraud. We believe the petitioners have falsified documents to expedite this removal for a commercial sale. My father shifted in his seat. He leaned over and whispered something to Stanwyck, his face a mask of righteous indignation. He looked so sure of himself. He performed the role of the aggrieved parent so perfectly that for a second, even I doubted myself. The judge sighed. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. I am going to grant a continuance of 7 days, she said. I want the service issue clarified. If the affidavit is false, I will dismiss the current filing. She looked directly at me then. Her eyes were not unkind, but they were hard. Ms. Rogers, I understand this is a family dispute. Emotions run high in these cases. But this court operates on facts. If you claim fraud, you need to bring me evidence, not emotions. Do not waste my time with family drama. This is a civil matter. I felt the blood drain from my face. Bring evidence, not emotions. She didn't see the betrayal. She didn't see the years of manipulation. She saw a messy docket number she wanted to clear. I felt both seen acknowledged as a litigant and completely dismissed as a human being. We walked out of the courtroom. My parents were ahead of us. Thomas was walking briskly, his head high. Stanwyck was clapping him on the shoulder. My mother trailed behind them, looking like a ghost. As they reached the elevators, my father turned. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. There was no love in them. There was no regret. There was only a cold, hard calculation. He looked at me like I was a cracked foundation he needed to patch over. Then the elevator doors closed, and they were gone. We need more, Nina said as we walked to her car. The travel records are good, but Stanwyck will argue that you got the mail anyway. We need to prove the lie. I spent the next 48 hours in a state of manic focus. I was not sleeping. I was fueled by caffeine and a cold. Sharp rage that sat in my chest like a block of ice. I needed to prove I wasn't served on the 12th. I had my flight records, but flight records only proved I flew. They didn't prove where I was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when the process server claimed he handed me papers. I remembered I had stopped for gas in a rental car on the way to my hotel in Chicago. I pulled up my credit card statement. There it was. Shell Station 405, 2:15 p.m. I called the number listed for the station. I begged the manager. I told him it was a legal emergency. He was reluctant, but for $50 sent via a cash app, he agreed to check the tapes. 4 hours later, he emailed me a video file. It was grainy, black and white footage, but there I was, standing at pump 4, windblown, wrestling with the nozzle of a gas pump, 300 miles away from where the process server swore under oath I had been standing. I forwarded it to Nina. Timeline contradiction confirmed. I typed, but Nina had been digging too. That afternoon, she called me to her office. She had received the first batch of documents from the subpoena she served on Thomas regarding his communications with Larkridge. You need to prepare yourself, Nina said. She slid a stack of printed emails across the desk. I picked up the top one. It was an email from Thomas to a project manager at Larkridge named Kevin. Kevin, regarding the holdout at the Briar Hollow property. We are moving forward with the eviction. The occupant is stubborn, but we expect the unit to be clear by the end of the month. Proceed with the demolition scheduling. The occupant, the holdout, demolition. He wasn't just selling the house. They were going to bulldoze it. The house I had painted. The house where I had hosted Thanksgiving. The house where I had finally felt safe after my divorce. My father was discussing its destruction casually, as if he were talking about removing a tree stump. There was another email, dated 2 months prior. Thomas, we need to finalize the relocation plan for the tenants in the acquired zone. Are you sure you don't need assistance with the Rogers unit? My father's reply. No. Family matters. Require a delicate hand. I will handle the removal personally. It is cleaner this way. Cleaner. He thought evicting me with a deputy sheriff at dawn was cleaner than telling me the truth. I felt sick, But the sickness was quickly replaced by a realization: if Larkridge was this involved, if they were discussing demolition, then this wasn't just about my parents being broke. This was a massive development. I need to see who these people are, I said. That evening, there was a community development meeting at the town hall. I had seen a flyer for it at the grocery store. Larkridge Renewal Partners, a vision for the future. I wore a baseball cap and a heavy coat. I stood in the back of the gymnasium. The room was packed. On one side, there were men in expensive suits standing next to easels displaying glossy renderings of glass and steel buildings. On the other side were my neighbor's people in work boots and jeans, looking worried. A man from Larkridge took the microphone. He was young, smiling, and used words like revitalization, mixed use, and economic injection. We are not just building condos, he said. We are building a future. We are taking underutilized, decaying assets and turning them into a vibrant community hub. Decaying assets. That was my home. That was Mrs. Gable's home. A woman stood up near the front. I recognized her. She ran the bakery on Main Street. What about the rents? She asked, her voice shaking. If you build this, the property taxes go up. The rents go up. Where do we go? The man smiled. A practiced, empty smile. Progress always requires transition. He said, but we are committed to working with the community. I looked around the room. I saw the fear in people's faces. I realized then that my personal nightmare was just one drop in a much larger ocean. My parents hadn't just betrayed me. They had sold out our neighborhood. They had joined the side of the suits and the renderings. They were the collaborators. I left the meeting before it ended. The air outside felt colder than before. When I got home, Nina called. Her voice was different this time. It wasn't professional and brisk. It was quiet. Caroline, are you sitting down? I sat on the edge of my bed. Yes, we got the financials from the subpoena. She said, the loan documents your father signed with the private lenders. Okay, I said. We knew he was borrowing money. Yes, she said. But the loan he took out 6 months ago, the big one, the one he is using to pay off his other debts. It required a guarantor, someone with a cleaner credit history and a steady income. I stopped breathing. He used my name, I whispered. He didn't just use your name, Nina said. He used you as a cosigner. There is a signature here. Caroline, it is the same practice signature from the certified mail receipt. But this is worse. This is a promissory note. He made you personally liable for $200,000 of debt. The room spun. I am co-signed on a loan I didn't know about. Yes, Nina said. And here's the hard truth. This is bank fraud. This is identity theft at a felony level. If we report this, if we use this in court, it is not just a civil dispute anymore. Thomas could go to prison. Gwen could be charged as an accomplice. I stared at the wall. Prison. My father, the man who taught me to tie my shoes, in a prison cell. But if we don't use it, Nina continued, and he defaults on that loan, which he will, if the sale doesn't go through, the lenders will come after you. They will garnish your wages. They will take any asset you have left. They will ruin you. I hung up the phone. I couldn't speak. I walked through my house, turning on every light. I needed to see everything clearly. I looked at the walls I had painted. I looked at the floors. They had sold me. They had literally sold my future to buy themselves a few more months of pretending to be rich. I needed to ask her. I needed to hear her say it. I knew my mother went to the library on Tuesday nights for her book club. I drove there and waited in the parking lot. The meeting ended at 8. At 8:15. She walked out. She was alone, walking toward her car, clutching her purse tight to her side. Mom, I said. She jumped, nearly dropping her keys. She spun around, her eyes wide with terror. Caroline, she gasped. You shouldn't be here. Thomas said. Stop, I said. I stepped into the circle of light from the street lamp. Stop telling me what Thomas said. I walked closer to her. She backed up until she was pressed against the door of her sedan. I know about the loan. Mom. Her face crumbled. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was an instant collapse. Her structure gave way. She slumped against the car, covering her face with her hands. I told him not to. She sobbed. I told him it was too much. But you let him do it. I said, you watched him sign my name. You watched him put a $200,000 noose around my neck. Why? She looked up at me, her face wet with tears, her mascara running in dark streaks. He was going to lose everything. Caroline, the house, the cars, his reputation. He was talking about ending it. She whispered the last part. I felt a flicker of pity, but I crushed it. So you decided to sacrifice me instead, I asked. To save his pride? I thought we could pay it back, she cried. He said once the Larkridge deal went through, we would pay off the loan and you would never know. We were going to fix it. We were just borrowing your credit for a few months. You don't borrow a person. Mom, I shouted, you don't steal your daughter's life. I couldn't lose him, she whispered. I have been married to him for 40 years. I couldn't let him drown. So you drowned me, I said. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. He handles the hard parts, she said, retreating into that same pathetic defense she had used my whole life. He deals with the money. I just wanted peace. You have no peace. I said, you have a felony, and you have a daughter who is about to put you in jail. She froze. You wouldn't, Carrie, please, we are your family. I turned my back on her. I walked to my car, leaving her sobbing in the parking lot of the public library. When I got home, I went to the digital archives on my computer. I was looking for anything else, any other lie. I felt like an archaeologist digging through the ruins of a civilization I had once thought was majestic. I found an old backup file from a phone I had 5 years ago. I opened the voicemail folder. There was a message from my father. It was dated from the week of my divorce, the week I signed the deed transfer. I clicked play. It was a pocket dial. He must have called me and not realized the line was open, leaving a message of the background noise. I heard the clinking of silverware. He was at lunch. Worry about it. Stan. My father's voice said. It was jovial, relaxed. She is a mess right now, crying all the time. She'll sign anything if we say it's for her own good. I can get the property into the trust by Friday. There was a pause. Another man's voice mumbled something. No, she won't read it. My father laughed. She trusts me. That is the beauty of it. The recording ended. I sat there, the silence of the room deafening. That is the beauty of it. My trust wasn't a virtue to him. It was a vulnerability. It was a loophole he could exploit. I started to shake. I shook so hard my phone slipped from my hand and clattered onto the floor. I hugged my knees to my chest, rocking back and forth. I finally understood them. They weren't monsters under the bed. They weren't cartoon villains. They were something far more terrifying. They were weak, desperate people addicted to the appearance of success. They were people who had lived beyond their means for decades, terrified of being exposed as average, and that shame had metastasized. It had eaten away at their morality until they could look at their own child and see nothing but an asset to be liquidated. They loved their lifestyle more than they loved me. The next morning, Nina called me into her office. She looked grim. We have a choice to make, she said. She laid 2 options out on the desk. Option A. We settle. Larkridge is nervous. They know we have the emails. They are offering to pay you $20,000 to vacate in 30 days. Your parents walk away with the sale money. The loan gets paid off. You avoid the family destruction, but you lose the house and you walk away with almost nothing compared to what you put in. And option B, I asked. Option B. We go to court tomorrow and we drop the bomb. Nina said. We file the counterclaim for fraud. We introduce the loan documents. We play the voicemail. We expose everything. And then we win. Nina said. But it will be a bloodbath. Your parents will face criminal investigations. The Larkridge deal will likely implode. Your father will be ruined. The family aunts, uncles, cousins will likely take sides. And many of them will blame you for calling the cops on your elderly parents. It will be ugly. Caroline, it will be a war. I looked at the 2 options, silence and a payoff, or truth and scorched earth. I thought about the relocation plan. I thought about the holdout. I thought about my mother in the parking lot, choosing her husband's pride over my safety. I thought about the woman at the town hall meeting, asking where she would go when the rents went up. If I settled, I was letting them win. I was letting them get away with it. I was letting them do this to someone else. But if I fought, I was the one pulling the trigger on my own family. I need the night. I said to Nina, I need to think. Take the night, she said. But tomorrow morning, we walk into that courtroom. You need to know which version of the story we are telling. I drove home. The house was quiet. I touched the walls. I walked through the rooms. I wasn't just fighting for a building. I was fighting for the truth of my own life. If I took the money, I was agreeing that my trust had a price tag. I was agreeing that what they did was acceptable business. I stood by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on. I knew what I had to do. But knowing it and doing it were two different things. I walked into Nina Calder's office at 9 in the morning, the decision sitting in my stomach like a stone I had swallowed whole. I had not slept. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, weighing the cost of silence against the cost of war. Silence meant taking the $20,000. It meant letting my parents erase my ownership of the house, pay off their debts with the proceeds of my displacement, and pretend that we were still a family. It meant I would spend every Thanksgiving for the rest of my life passing the gravy to a man who had stolen my identity, knowing that he knew I knew, and that we had both agreed to look away. War meant exposing them. It meant filing a police report. It meant standing in a courtroom and testifying that Thomas and Gwen Rogers were frauds. I sat down in the chair opposite Nina. She didn't ask how I was. She just waited. I am not settling, I said. Nina nodded slowly. She closed the folder on her desk. You understand what this triggers, she asked. Once we file the fraud complaint regarding the loan and the signature, the eviction case changes. We are no longer just defending you against removal. We are attacking their credibility. We are alleging criminal misconduct. I understand, I said. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady, which surprised me. I signed the affidavit of forgery. I signed the complaint regarding identity theft. The scratch of the pen against the paper was loud in the quiet office. It sounded like a tearing. I am not doing this for revenge, Nina, I said, looking up at her. I am doing it because if I don't, they will do it again. They will do it to someone else. They will do it until they are stopped. Nina took the papers. I will file these with the district attorney's office and the civil court clerk within the hour. The investigation will be separate from the eviction hearing, but the existence of the complaint will be our shield tomorrow. I walked out of her office feeling lighter, but it was a terrifying kind of lightness. It was the weightlessness of freefall. The retaliation began less than 24 hours later. It didn't start with a lawyer's letter or a confrontation. It started with a vibration in my pocket. I was at the grocery store, buying milk and eggs, trying to remember what normal life felt like. My phone buzzed, then it buzzed again, and again, a rapid-fire staccato that usually meant bad news. I pulled it out. It was a group text. The thread was titled, Rogers Family Updates. It included my aunts, my uncles, 3 of my cousins, and my brother David. The first message was from my father. Family, I am writing this with a heavy heart. As you know, we have been trying to help Caroline through some difficult times. Unfortunately, her mental state has deteriorated. She has fallen under the influence of predatory lawyers who are convincing her to attack us. We are trying to get her the help she needs, but she has become unstable and hostile. Please pray for her, and please do not engage with her if she reaches out. She is not herself. I stared at the screen, standing in the dairy aisle, the cold air from the refrigerated case washing over me. Unstable, predatory lawyers. Pray for her. He was inoculating them against the truth. He knew the fraud allegations were coming, so he was planting the seed that I was crazy. If I accused him of forgery, it wasn't evidence. It was a symptom of my instability. A message popped up from my Aunt Linda. Oh, Thomas, I am so sorry. We will keep her in our prayers. Let us know if we can do anything. Then one from my cousin Sarah. who I had babysat for years. That is so sad. I hope she gets help. I felt a physical blow to my chest. They believed him. Of course they believed him. He was Thomas Rogers, the pillar of the community, the man who carved the turkey. I was just the divorced daughter with the messy life. I wanted to type back. I wanted to scream into the digital void. He stole my identity. He forged my name. But I knew how that would look. It would look exactly like the instability he was warning them about. I watched the messages roll in emojis of praying hands, broken hearts, expressions of sympathy for the parents who were being attacked by their ungrateful child. I left the cart in the middle of the aisle. I walked out of the store. I sat in my car and blocked the group chat. I didn't leave it. I just muted it. I couldn't bear to see them burying me alive. But I needed the record of it. Bring evidence, not emotions. This text thread was evidence. It was evidence of malice. I drove home, my hands gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw a police cruiser parked across the street. My heart hammered. Had they called the police on me already? But the cruiser didn't move. I parked and got out. As I walked to my mailbox, the window of the cruiser rolled down. It was Deputy Miles Harlan. Checking the mail, he asked casually, something like that. I said, "Am I being arrested?" "Miles." He shook his head, looking both ways down the street. "No, Caroline, but I wanted to give you a heads up. We got a call this morning, anonymous complaint, about what I asked, about code violations." He said, "Tall grass, debris in the yard, fire hazards." I looked at my lawn. It was freshly mowed. The porch was swept. My yard is fine. I said, "I know," Miles said. I drove by and marked the complaint as unfounded. But listen to me. When people start playing this game, the lawyers, the developers, they use every lever they have. They will call code enforcement. They will call animal control. They will call the fire marshal to report faulty wiring. He leaned his arm out the window. They are trying to build a paper trail that says you are a negligent occupant. They want to show the judge that the property is unsafe in your hands. "Thank you." "Miles," I whispered, "keep your nose clean." "Caroline," he said, "check your smoke detectors. Make sure your trash cans are pulled in on time. Don't give them an inch." He rolled up the window and drove away. I spent the next 3 hours in a state of manic diligence. I went through my house like an inspector. I pressed the test button on every smoke detector. I replaced the batteries even if they chirped. I went into the backyard and measured the grass with a ruler 2 inches. I checked the exterior outlets. I made sure the hose was coiled perfectly. I felt like I was living in a museum exhibit. I couldn't leave a coffee cup in the sink. I couldn't leave a pair of shoes by the door. My home had become a minefield, and I was the one tiptoeing through the blast zone. At 4 o'clock, Nina called. I found the money. She said, "The loan I asked." "No," she said, "the payment." We subpoenaed the bank records for an LLC called Rogers Strategic Solutions. I frowned. I had never heard of it. Thomas formed it 6 months ago. Nina said, and looking at the transaction history, it has received 3 payments from Larkridge Holdings, $5,000, $10,000, and a final payment of $15,000 last week, $30,000. I said, "It looks like a consulting fee." Nina said, "But there is no consulting being done." "Caroline, this is a kickback. They are paying him to deliver the property. And the timing of the last payment, the $15,000, coincides exactly with the day he filed the eviction. He got paid to file it." I said, "Yes," she said. "But here's the interesting part. The LLC is only in Thomas's name. Gwen isn't on it. The checks were deposited into a separate account at a different bank than their joint checking. She doesn't know." I said, "It is possible she thinks he is just desperate." Nina said, "She might not know he's profiting. She might not know he has $30,000 hidden away while she is crying to you about bankruptcy. This was the wedge. My father wasn't just dragging my mother down with him. He was deceiving her too. He was using her fear to control her. While he pocketed cash from the people destroying our family. I hung up. I needed to do 2 things. First, I needed to protect myself from the financial ruin they had initiated. Second, I needed to offer my mother a lifeboat, even if she didn't deserve it. I went to the Victim Advocacy Center downtown. It was a depressing office with gray carpet and posters about identity theft. I sat with a caseworker named Mrs. Alvarez. She was kind, efficient, and horrifyingly used to stories like mine. "We are going to place a freeze on all 3 credit bureaus," she said, typing rapidly. "We are going to file an affidavit with the Federal Trade Commission. And we are going to send a fraud alert to the lender holding that $200,000 note." She handed me a stack of papers. "Caroline, you need to understand something," she said gently. "When we send this fraud alert, the lender will likely accelerate the loan. They will demand immediate repayment from the primary borrower, your father. This will trigger a collapse of his credit." "Do it," I said. She looked at me. It felt like I was signing a death warrant, not for a person, but for an image. I was killing the version of Thomas Rogers who was a good provider. I was killing the version of my parents who were respectable. I walked out of the advocacy center feeling hollow. I wasn't celebrating. I felt grief. Deep, heavy grief. I was mourning them while they were still alive. I drove to my parents' house. I knew Thomas played poker on Thursday nights at the Elks Lodge. It was one of the few rituals he refused to give up. Even as his world crumbled, he had to keep up appearances. I parked down the street and walked up. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I knocked. My mother opened the door. She looked terrible. Her eyes were swollen, her hair unwashed. She wore the same gray cardigan she had worn in court. When she saw me, she tried to close the door. I put my hand against it. "I am not here to fight." "Mom," I said, "I am here to give you a chance." She hesitated, then stepped back, letting me into the kitchen. The table was covered in papers, bills, late notices, unopened envelopes. "Thomas isn't here," she said. "I know." I said, "I came to talk to you." I sat down at the table. I didn't take off my coat. "Mom, tomorrow is the hearing. Nina is going to introduce evidence that Thomas committed bank fraud. She is going to show that he forged my signature on a $200,000 loan." Gwen flinched. "I know," she whispered. "You told me. But there is more." I said, "We found the bank records for Rogers Strategic Solutions." She frowned. "What is that?" "It is a company Thomas started." I said, "Larkridge has been paying him. They paid him $30,000 directly. He didn't use it to pay the mortgage. He didn't use it to pay off the credit cards. He put it in a separate account." She stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "He is getting paid to kick me out." "Mom," I said, "and he is hiding the money from you." She shook her head. No, he wouldn't. He puts everything in the joint account. We have been married 40 years. I pulled the printout of the bank transfer from my pocket. I slid it across the table. "Look at the dates," I said. "Look at the signature card. Just him." She picked up the paper. Her hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. She read it. She read it again. "He told me we were broke," she whispered. "He told me we didn't have money for the electric bill. He lied." I said, "Just like he lied to me." I leaned forward. "Mom, listen to me. Tomorrow, if you stand up in that court and lie for him, if you say I am a tenant, if you say you served me those papers, you are committing perjury. And when the fraud investigation starts, you will be listed as a co-conspirator. You could lose your pension. You could go to jail." She looked up at me, terror in her eyes. "What do I do?" she asked. "He is my husband. You tell the truth." I said, "You get on that stand and you say you didn't serve me. You say you didn't know about the forgery. You separate yourself from him." She looked at the dark window, as if she expected Thomas to materialize and punish her for even listening to me. "He will be so angry," she said. "He will leave me. He has already left you." "Mom," I said, "he left you the moment he started hiding money and making you an accomplice to a felony. He is using you as a shield." I stood up. "If you testify truthfully, I will not include you in the civil suit for damages." I said, "I will only pursue Thomas, but you have to decide. Tomorrow morning, you are either with him or you are with the truth." I walked to the door. "Caroline," she called out, I turned. He wasn't always like this, she said. Her voice was small, pleading. I know. I said, that is the tragedy. I left her sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the bank statement that proved her marriage was a lie. I drove home, feeling drained. I needed comfort. I needed something that didn't feel like a legal document. I went to my bookshelf and pulled down my grandmother's old cookbook. It was a binder filled with handwritten index cards and magazine clippings. I wanted to make her oatmeal cookies. I needed the smell of cinnamon and sugar to chase away the smell of the lawyer's office. I flipped through the pages: apple pie, beef stew, chocolate cake, between the pages for chicken pot pie and chili. A photo slipped out. I picked it up. It was a Polaroid. The colors faded to a soft yellow. It was me, maybe 5 years old. I was sitting on my mother's shoulders. We were at a park somewhere. My hands were tangled in her hair, and her head was thrown back, laughing. I was laughing too. My mouth open in a wide, gap-toothed grin. We looked happy. We looked inseparable. I stared at the photo, and the anger that had been fueling me for days suddenly felt heavy, like wet wool. It would have been easier if they had always been monsters. It would have been easier if she had been cruel to me my whole life, but she hadn't been. She had made me soup when I was sick. She had sewn my prom dress. She had held me when my husband left. And that same woman had stood in a parking lot and told me she chose her husband's pride over my life. The photo didn't excuse anything. It didn't make the forgery okay. But it made the loss feel absolute. I wasn't just fighting a defendant. I was fighting the ghost of the mother in this picture. I put the photo back in the book. I didn't make the cookies. I couldn't eat. I went to bed. But sleep was impossible. At 2 a.m, I heard a noise. It wasn't a knock. It was a scraping sound. Metal on metal. Harsh and grinding. I shot up in bed. I grabbed the baseball bat I had started keeping by the nightstand. I crept to the window and peered through the blinds. A dark figure was standing at the end of my driveway. They were wearing a hoodie. They were doing something to my mailbox. I flipped on the porch light. The figure sprinted away, disappearing into the darkness down the street. They moved fast, too fast to be my father. This was someone young. I waited 5 minutes, my heart pounding, before I unlocked the front door and walked out to the mailbox. The black metal was deeply gouged. Someone had taken a key or a knife and scratched a single word into the paint. Leave. I ran my finger over the jagged letters. This wasn't Thomas. Thomas would send a letter. Thomas would send a text. This was Larkridge. This was the relocation plan. They were tired of the legal delays. They were sending a message. I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The pressure was no longer just familial. I was standing in the way of a multi-million-dollar development, and they were done being polite. I took a picture of the mailbox. I sent it to Nina. They are escalating. I typed. I went back inside and locked every lock. I pushed the heavy armchair in front of the door. I sat in the chair with the bat across my knees, watching the sun come up. The morning of the hearing was gray and rainy. The sky looked like bruised iron. I met Nina at the courthouse coffee shop. I was wearing my best suit, a dark blue blazer and slacks. I wanted to look like a fortress. Nina looked tired but focused. Okay, she said. Here is the strategy. When you take the stand, Stanwyck is going to try to rattle you. He is going to try to make you sound emotional, entitled, and unstable. He will bring up your divorce. He will bring up your financial struggles from 5 years ago. I nodded. I am ready. You need to be boring. Caroline, Nina said, you need to be a wall of facts. Do not say, I felt betrayed. Say, I did not authorize that transaction. Do not say, my father lied. Say, the document contains a factual inaccuracy. Use neutral language, she said. It is the only way to counteract the unstable daughter narrative. Neutral language. It felt like swallowing glass. I had to take the most painful experience of my life, the destruction of my family, and strip it of all feeling. I had to describe the knife in my back as a foreign object. We walked to the courtroom. The hallway was crowded. I saw them. Thomas was standing by the window, talking to Stanwyck. He looked diminished. His suit looked slightly too big, as if he had shrunk in the last week. Gwen was sitting on a bench alone. She was staring at the floor. She looked like a child in trouble. When I walked past her, she looked up. Her eyes met mine. They were red-rimmed and terrified. I didn't stop. I couldn't. If I stopped, I would crumble. We entered the courtroom. The bailiff called the case. Rogers versus Rogers. I took my seat at the defendant's table. I laid my hands flat on the wood. I felt the vibration of the room, the hum of the lights, the murmur of the clerk. I looked at the judge, the same woman as before. She looked impatient. "Ms. Calder," she said, "you requested this continuance to address the issue of service. I trust you have something substantial, or we are proceeding with the eviction order today." Nina stood up. "We do, Your Honor," she said, "and we have filed a counter-motion regarding fraud, identity theft, and abuse of process." The judge's eyebrows shot up. "Fraud?" she asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Nina said. "We intend to prove that the petitioners not only failed to serve the respondent, but have engaged in a systemic effort to defraud both this court and financial institutions using the respondent's identity." A murmur went through the courtroom. Thomas stiffened in his chair. Stanwyck looked annoyed. The judge leaned forward. "Call your first witness," she said. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my mind was clear. I walked to the witness stand. I placed my hand on the Bible. I swore to tell the truth. I sat down and looked out at the courtroom. I saw my father's angry, fearful face. I saw my mother's bowed head. I saw the Larkridge lawyer checking his watch. I knew that whatever happened in the next hour, I would never be the same. I might win the house, or I might lose it, but the Caroline Rogers who had trusted blindly, who had signed papers without reading them, who had believed that love was a safety net, she was gone. I took a breath. "Please state your name for the record." Nina said, "Caroline Rogers." I said, my voice was steady. I refused to be quietly erased. The courtroom air was stagnant, heavy with the scent of floor wax and the low hum of the ventilation system. I sat at the defendant's table. My hands clasped so tightly that my knuckles had turned the color of old parchment. Beside me, Nina Calder arranged her documents with the precision of a surgeon laying out instruments. "Ms. Calder," the judge said, her voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room, "you may proceed." Nina stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not pace. She simply lifted a single piece of paper, the eviction petition, and held it up like a specimen in a jar. "Your Honor," she began, "the petitioners are asking this court to enforce a removal based on a claim of unauthorized occupancy. They paint a picture of a squatter, a stranger who has overstayed their welcome. But the evidence will show that the respondent, Caroline Rogers, is not a squatter. She is a homeowner who was tricked into signing her deed into a trust, and who is now being targeted by a fraudulent eviction process designed to clear the property for a commercial sale." "Objection," Stanwyck said, half rising from his chair. "This is a simple landlord-tenant dispute. Counsel is trying to muddy the waters with irrelevant family history. It goes to the heart of the good faith requirement." "Your Honor," Nina countered smoothly, "and to the validity of the service." The judge adjusted her glasses. "I will allow it. Keep it focused. Ms. Calder." Nina called me to the stand first. I walked the short distance to the witness box, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room on my back. My father was staring at the table in front of him, his jaw set in a hard, rigid line. My mother was looking at her hands. I sat down. I took a breath. I remembered Nina's advice. Boring, factual, neutral. "Ms. Rogers," Nina asked, "can you describe the events of November 14th, 3 years ago?" "Yes," I said. My voice was steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. I was at my parents' home. I had just finalized my divorce the previous week. I was financially unstable and emotionally distressed. And what happened that afternoon, my parents presented me with a stack of documents. I said, "They told me that because of my ex-husband's debts. My ownership of my home was at risk. They proposed transferring the title into a family trust to protect the asset for me. They explicitly stated that the house would remain mine in practice, and that the trust was a formality for my protection. "Did you read the documents?" Nina asked. I looked at Thomas. He finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "No," I said. "I trusted my parents. I signed where they told me to sign." Nina walked back to her table and picked up the trust agreement. "Are you aware that the trust contains a clause, Section 4(2), that allows the trustees to remove any occupant with 30 days' notice if the property is being leveraged for refinancing? I was not aware of that clause until last week." I said, "It was never explained to me." "Thank you," Nina said. Stanwyck stood up for cross-examination. He buttoned his jacket, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ms. Rogers," he said, "you are a college-educated woman. Are you not?" "Yes," I said. "And you run your own business?" "Yes." "So you are accustomed to reading contracts?" "Yes." "And yet, you want this court to believe that you signed a deed transfer, the most important financial document in most people's lives, without reading a single word, because you were sad." He said the word sad with a sneer, as if it were a synonym for stupid. I felt a flash of heat in my chest. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him about the nights I spent crying on the floor, about the way my father had poured me tea and told me he would fix everything. But I saw Nina's face, neutral. I relied on the verbal representations of the trustees, who were my parents. I said calmly, "In my family." Verbal agreements were considered binding. I made a mistake in trusting them. I am not denying that. Stanwyck paused, looking for a crack. He didn't find one. "No further questions," he muttered. I stepped down. I felt a strange vibration in my legs, but I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't cried. I had just told the truth. Next, Nina called the process server. A man named Mr. Baines. He lumbered to the stand, wearing a wrinkled suit that looked 2 sizes too big. He looked annoyed to be there. "Mr. Baines," Nina said, "you signed an affidavit stating that on the 12th of last month, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you personally served Caroline Rogers at her place of employment." "That is correct." Baines said. "Can you describe the woman you served?" Baines shifted in his seat. He glanced at his notes. Female, white, average height, brown hair." "Did she say anything to you?" "She took the papers and said, 'I will handle this,'" Baines said. Nina walked to the evidence table. She picked up a thumb drive. "Your Honor, I would like to introduce Exhibit C. This is security footage from a Shell gas station in Peoria, Illinois. It is time-stamped for the 12th of last month, at 2:15 in the afternoon." She plugged the drive into the court's laptop, and the image appeared on the monitors. It was grainy, but it was clearly me. I was standing by a gas pump, 300 miles away from where Mr. Baines claimed to have seen me. The courtroom went silent. "Mr. Baines," Nina said, her voice hardening, "Peoria is a 4-hour drive from here, unless Miss Rogers has the ability to teleport. She could not have been in 2 places at once. So I will ask you again, who did you serve?" Baines turned red. He looked at Stanwyck, then at my father. I served the person at the address I was given," he stammered. "A woman came to the door. She said she was Caroline Rogers. Did she show ID number?" "We don't usually ask for ID on a residential drop," he said. "So anyone could have answered that door and claimed to be her, I guess." He said, "And the address?" Nina asked. "You listed it as a place of employment. That is what the client told me to write," Baines said, pointing a thick finger at my father. "Mr. Rogers gave me the address and said, 'Serve her here. It is where she works.'" The judge leaned forward. Her expression had shifted from boredom to a sharp, predatory focus. "Mr. Baines, are you telling me the plaintiff instructed you on how to falsify the location of service?" Baines's eyes went wide. "I didn't say falsify. I served who I served. You may step down," the judge said. Her voice was ice cold. Nina looked at the judge. "Your Honor, we have established that the respondent was not in the state. We have established that the process server cannot identify her. This service is defective on its face." But we need to know who actually took those papers. We need to know who impersonated my client. She turned to the gallery. I call Gwen Rogers to the stand. A gasp went through the room. It came from my father. Thomas stood up. You can't do that. She is a plaintiff. Sit down, Mr. Rogers. The judge snapped. My mother stood up slowly. She looked like she was walking to the gallows. Her gray cardigan hung loosely on her frame. She walked past Thomas, and I saw him hiss something at her, a sharp, whispered command. She flinched as if he had struck her. She took the stand. She placed her hand on the Bible. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely keep it flat. Mrs. Rogers, Nina said gently. You heard Mr. Baines's testimony. On the 12th of last month, were you at the address listed on the affidavit? Gwen looked at Thomas. He was staring at her, his eyes bulging with a mixture of rage and panic. He was willing her to lie. He was willing her to protect the facade. Then she looked at me. I held her gaze. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just looked at her, silently reminding her of the conversation in her kitchen. You are either with him or you are with the truth, Mrs. Rogers, Nina prompted. Yes, Gwen whispered. And did you accept a package from a process server? Gwen closed her eyes. A tear leaked out and tracked through the powder on her cheek. Yes, she said. Did you tell him you were Caroline? I didn't say the name. Gwen stammered. He asked, Are you Ms. Rogers? And I said yes. I am Mrs. Rogers. It wasn't a lie. But you signed the receipt. Nina said. She held up the green card. Is this your signature? Gwen looked at the scrawl, the practiced forgery, the signature that looked just enough like mine to pass, but just different enough to be clumsy. No, she whispered. Who signed it? Mrs. Rogers. The room was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Thomas handled the mail, Gwen said. Her voice was barely audible. I took the envelope inside, Thomas said. Thomas said he would take care of it. He said Caroline didn't need to be bothered with the details. He signed it. Thomas slammed his hand on the table. She is confused, he shouted. He stood up, his face purple. She doesn't know what she is talking about. She has been under a lot of stress. Mr. Rogers, the judge shouted, banging her gavel. She is lying, Thomas yelled, pointing a trembling finger at Gwen. She is trying to ruin me. And that ungrateful girl pointing at me, she is in on it. I gave them everything I paid for that house. I paid for everything. He was unraveling. The mask of the respectable patriarch had shattered, revealing the terrified, desperate man beneath. He wasn't a mastermind. He was just a man who had borrowed too much, lied too much, and was now cornered. Mr. Rogers, sit down or I will have you removed, the judge ordered. Thomas slumped back into his chair. He put his head in his hands. Beside him, Stanwyck closed his file folder, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. The judge looked at Gwen. You may step down. Mrs. Rogers. Gwen walked back to her seat. But she didn't sit next to Thomas. She sat on the bench in the back row, alone. The judge took a moment to write something on her notepad. Then she looked up. I have heard enough, she said. She looked at Stanwyck. Counsel, the affidavit of service is clearly fraudulent. The testimony of the process server is incompetent at best and perjurious at worst. And your client? She gestured to Thomas, has demonstrated a shocking lack of credibility. She turned to me. Ms. Rogers, I am dismissing this eviction action without prejudice. You are not required to vacate the property at this time. I let out a breath, my shoulders slumping. However, the judge continued, raising a finger, I want to be clear. This court is ruling only on the eviction petition before me. The issues regarding the validity of the trust, the deed transfer, and the allegations of fraud regarding the loan, those are complex civil and criminal matters that must be adjudicated in the appropriate venue. I cannot dissolve the trust from this bench today. She looked at me with a grave expression. You have won the battle, Ms. Rogers, but you have not cleared the title. You are still living in a house owned by a hostile trust. I suggest you get your affairs in order. Case dismissed. She banged the gavel. It was over, but it wasn't over. We walked out of the courtroom. The hallway felt different now. The air was still stale, but the power dynamic had shifted. Thomas did not look at me. He walked fast, heading for the exit, leaving Stanwyck trailing behind him. He didn't look at Gwen, either. He looked like a man fleeing a burning building. Gwen remained on the bench inside the courtroom, staring at the wall. I hesitated, wanting to go to her, but Nina touched my arm. "Not now," she said. "She needs to figure out her own path." We walked toward the elevators. Stanwyck intercepted us. He looked tired. The slick confidence was gone. "Ms. Calder," he said. A word Nina stopped. "What is it?" "Stanwyck." "My clients." "Larkridge are pragmatists," he said. He didn't mention Thomas. Thomas was already discarded. "This has become messy. They are willing to offer a settlement to expedite the vacancy." "How much?" Nina asked. $50,000. Stanwyck said. "Cash for keys. Your client vacates in 14 days. We drop all claims. The trust dissolves the loan obligation." I looked at him. $50,000. It was more than the $20,000 they had offered before. It was enough to start over. It was enough to rent an apartment, maybe buy a small condo in a cheaper town. But it was hush money. It was money to make the fraud go away. It was money to let Thomas off the hook for the $200,000 loan he had pinned on me. "It expires at 5 p.m. today," Stanwyck said. I looked him in the eye. "I am not signing anything today," I said. Stanwyck shrugged. "Suit yourself. But you know the law. The eviction was dismissed on a technicality. The trust still owns the deed. We will file again. And next time, we will dot every I and cross every T." He walked away. We walked out of the courthouse into the gray drizzle. Deputy Harlan was standing by his cruiser, finishing a cigarette. He saw us and nodded. "You survived," he said. "For today." I said. He flicked the cigarette into a puddle. "Just be careful." "Caroline," he said quietly, "you poked the bear. Civil victories. They don't always feel like winning. Sometimes they just make the other side meaner." "I know." I said. I drove home alone. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. I had won. I wasn't homeless. My mother had told the truth. My father had been exposed. But as I turned onto my street, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I was driving through a graveyard of memories. Every corner, every tree, reminded me of the family that no longer existed. I pulled into the driveway. The rain was coming down harder now. I ran to the porch. There was a package leaning against the door, and taped to the doorframe, right where the eviction notice had been, was a slip from the post office. "Sorry we missed you." But below it, there was another envelope. It was taped securely in a plastic bag to protect it from the rain. It wasn't an eviction notice. I tore it open. It was a legal filing, but it wasn't from eviction court. It was from the Chancery Court. The Briar Hollow Family Trust versus Caroline Rogers. Complaint for declaratory judgment and quiet title. I scanned the document. It was a lawsuit. A real, heavy, expensive lawsuit. They weren't trying to evict me as a squatter anymore. They were suing me to prove that the trust was valid, that my signature on the deed transfer was legitimate, and that I had no equitable claim to the home. They were suing me for the title, and at the bottom, I saw the name of the law firm representing the trust. It wasn't Stanwyck. It was a massive regional firm. Larkridge had brought in the big guns. I looked at the package on the floor. It was a certified letter from the lender, the one holding the $200,000 loan. I opened it. Notice of default and acceleration. Due to the fraud alert placed on this account, the full balance of $212,450 is immediately due and payable. Failure to remit payment will result in immediate legal action against all signatories. I stood on my porch, the rain misting against my face. The eviction was gone, but the war had just evolved. They were coming for the house through the title court, and the bank was coming for me for the money Thomas stole. I looked at the street. It was quiet. The neighbors were inside, safe in their homes, unaware that a bomb had just gone off on my doorstep. I went inside. I locked the door. I walked to the kitchen and placed the new lawsuit and the bank letter on the counter, right next to the empty spot where I used to keep my parents' birthday cards. I wasn't safe. I wasn't free. I picked up the phone and dialed Nina. "It's me," I said when she answered. "Did they offer more money?" she asked. "No," I said. "They filed a quiet title suit, and the bank just called the loan." Nina sighed. A long, heavy sound. "So, it begins," she said. "Are you ready for round 2? I looked out the window at the backyard, at the hydrangeas my mother loved, at the fence my father built. I realized then that I wasn't fighting for the house anymore. I was fighting for my name. I was fighting to prove that I existed as a person, not just as collateral damage in their financial schemes. "I am ready," I said. I hung up. I went to the fridge and poured a glass of cold water. I drank it standing up, staring at the wall. The silence in the house was absolute. It was no longer the silence of a sanctuary. It was the silence of a fortress before the siege. I wasn't Caroline the daughter anymore. I was Caroline the defendant, and I was going to make them regret every single signature they had faked. Thank you for listening to A Deputy Sheriff Showed Up at 6 a.m. with an Eviction Order. This story exposes the quiet, administrative brutality that can happen within families when money and pride take precedence over loyalty. I would love to hear your thoughts on Caroline's decision. Did she do the right thing by exposing her parents, or should she have taken the settlement? Please comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories for more tales of betrayal, justice, and the complexities of human relationships. Don't forget to like and share. Until next time.